Hey everyone, welcome to my social marketing campaign. I titled it Imperfection to Save the Planet, Normalizing and Supporting a Reduction in Meat Consumption in the Average American Diet. The campaign is a non-exclusionary message for developing consumption habits for the greater good, i.e. cutting out just a little bit of meat. You don't have to go full vegetarian or full vegan. That's the second point, is just understanding what do these things mean, what do those terms mean. I think often people socially don't understand one another when it comes to what people choose and choose not to eat. So just understanding where people come from, what they choose to do, and how those two options are not the only options or end-all be-alls. And then explain why imperfection is, in this case, a goal to strive for, when it's usually something you try to avoid. Audience is 13 to 35-year-olds, mainly because anybody older is often set in their ways and may not be as open to change, especially when it comes to things like climate and diet. People younger than 13 usually don't get to pick their food themselves. Parents or schools, whatever, usually decide what they eat on any given day. Sometimes they get a say, but not as much as 13 to 35-year-olds. However, being non-exclusionary, there's nothing about this campaign that says if you're older or younger, this doesn't apply to you. If someone from any age group finds this message appealing, it will seem appealing for a reason, because it's open to everybody. But 13 to 35-year-old is probably the prime target audience. Message: a push towards influencing and promoting consumers to adopt and maintain purchasing and consumption habits that align with plant-based diets. I say plant-based because that's also non-exclusionary. When you say vegan and vegetarian, people think you have to go all out, no meat ever again for the rest of your life. Done. Say goodbye. Not true. Plant-based just means plants are the base of your meals more often than meat are. It's what your meals are based around, it's what your nutrition's based around, etc. So same with that non-exclusion principle. In theory, a vegan or vegetarian doesn't eat meat 7 days a week. Here's a schedule of a whole week. With this non-exclusion idea, say for example, Monday, Wednesday. Say you eat 3 meals per day on each of these days, and all of them contain meat. Steak and eggs in the morning, burger at lunch, and sausage something for dinner. If you were to cut out meat on Monday and Wednesday, up to 28% of your carbon footprint can be reduced. That's just simple math, 2 divided by 7. If every single one of your meals contain meat and all of a sudden you take out 6 of them, up to 28% of your carbon footprint, specifically when it comes to meat, would now be gone, which is a pretty massive change. Why? Climate change, like I mentioned before with carbon footprints. Livestock, such as cows, sheep, and pigs, emit a large amount of greenhouse gases, mainly methane, and that's also mainly cows. It's a fun fact, it's actually cow burps, not cow farts, as you would logically think. In either way, less consumption of these animals means less support for having so many of them, which means less methane in the atmosphere. And methane is 64 times worse of a greenhouse gas, or I guess better greenhouse gas, than CO2. So removing as much of it as possible, or in the first place emitting as the less amount of it as possible, is ideal. Land and water usage are less climate factors, more environmental factors. Animals require a lot of land, they require a lot of water, just like us humans, but also the amount of land and water dedicated to growing crops just for the animals to eat, for then us to eat the animals, is also very large and can be used in better ways, as you'll see here. Some numbers. For example, in this Nat Geo article referencing the goal of feeding a global population expected to reach 10 billion by 2050, they stated even a small increase in the consumption of red meat or dairy foods would make this goal difficult or impossible to achieve. I like to see this in the opposite direction of even a small decrease in the consumption of these things would make it much more likely that we can actually support the people that are going to be here, very soon, and all the people who have been here for a while, rather than letting people starve or people fighting over food or just generally being stressed about where meals are going to come from. You might be wondering, how does that make any sense? You can divert your attention to this next statistic, or I guess it's a statistic by Scientific American. If all grain currently fed to livestock in the United States were consumed directly by people, the number of people who could be fed would be nearly 800 million. This is this idea that when you grow food, you feed it to cows, then you chop up the cows and we eat cows as humans. That's kind of a two-step process, and cows are just a middleman for nutrition, and a lot of nutrition gets wasted there, a lot of calories. But if you were to just grow food in the same land you're already using to grow food and giving it to people, that's a more efficient way of energy put in versus energy in the form of calories put out, which is just better for the world in terms of energy and resource usage, like water, time, fertilizer, stuff like that, and also just less carbon when we take out that middleman. My 3 pieces of information are this pamphlet you could find in a magazine or a newspaper. It's basically everything I just described, with the week, some facts, how to be imperfect and what that means, and then also some statistics, or I guess not statistics, but just a chart of how much protein is in certain foods, because a lot of times being vegetarian and vegan, people are like, oh, how do you get protein? Well, first, you don't need that much protein, and second, a lot of foods have protein, and it's actually easier for your body to digest these types of foods than it is for us to digest meat. Black bean burgers are one of my favorites. For example, well, this would just be an example of anything you can put on the back of the pamphlet. It's basically some way to be actionable for all these people who just learned a whole bunch of stuff on the front, and if you say, so what? Well, here's a recipe for you to try to get on your way. A billboard is also another very actionable, in-the-moment kind of thing. This idea of saying, not a vegetarian? No problem. Again, non-exclusionary. You don't have to be vegetarian to have a nice plant-based meal that is good for you and for the environment. I think Dave's Cafe would probably go out of business. But this idea that you could have a vegetarian or vegan burrito, breakfast, snacks, and any other meal or drink. There's no meat in drinks. But this idea that you're not shaming people for eating meat, being like, hey, you carbon emitter, come be better. Just saying like, hey, want to try something good that you might end up liking? That's also good for the world. Like, here you go. And this commercial ad is kind of long. Don't really want to go through all of it, but it's kind of similar to a pharmaceutical commercial. Just intro, happy people, explain how food impacts the environment. Is meat bad? Not necessarily. What is vegetarianism and veganism? And then explain how to be imperfect. What does that mean? Circle back, talk about meat, how it's bad for the climate, kind of just try to rail that in there, maybe people feel a little bit bad. Briefly explain how meat is bad for your health. A lot of times people are more selfish than they are about caring about other people. So when you talk about their own health, they kind of wake up a little bit. Tie back into being imperfectly vegetarian, saying you don't have to sacrifice everything, just a little bit. And then integrate some statistics. Some people like numbers, some people don't, but it's always useful to have. And then again, try to be actionable, give them links to apps, websites, stuff like that, so they can actually do something about what they just learned. And then end the commercial with happy people. Can't end with sad people. In conclusion, I love this quote by Helen Keller: alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. This idea is basically that a very few strongly dedicated grass eaters will not save the world. However, minor changes in diet that taste great, aid health, and are climate friendly, that are widely adopted and implemented, can. For example, like in the American diet, if everyone just cut out a little bit more meat, that amount of change is pretty massive when it comes to over 330 million people. All right. I went a little long. Thanks for sticking with me if you're still here, and that's my presentation.